Kia ora and welcome along. Whether you are watching or listening, we're so glad that you're joining us. Unless you've been under a rock for the past 4 days, I'm sure you're aware that this week has brought a sudden interruption to our otherwise fairly calm and normal homeschooling lives. That is the release by the government of amendments to the Education and Training Reform Bill. It came almost by stealth by the Minister of Education, Erica Stanford, and we'll be talking more about that shortly. But we felt it would just be good to bring you a panel of experienced and expert home educators into one space and give you an opportunity to hear straight up an explanation of what is happening, what you can do in this season, and how we can unite together as home educators here in New Zealand. Now, the National Council of Home Educators, known as NCHENZ, has nearly 5,000 members, which is a very high proportion of the 6,500 home educating families. So NCHENZ's focus is on creating an inclusive environment regardless of their cultural background or beliefs, feel welcomed and respected. And the National Council is committed to cultivating a space where individuals with diverse perspectives can coexist and collaborate in support of home education. So, as representatives of NCHENZ Executive, you have myself, Sheena Harris. I am the Regional Government Liaison with NCHENZ. We have with us as well Cynthia Hancox, our Chief Government Liaison Representative. And we've brought along with us some very special and very welcome guests. We have Issy, also known as Raving Dad. We've got Fran McCall of Functional Education, and Krystel Watts of Engaging Minds. So welcome to you. And you're going to get to know them just a little bit more shortly. But I just want to say again, welcome to all of you, whether you're listening or you're watching on YouTube. Thanks so much for taking the time in your super busy schedules to listen in. It is our hope that as well as this reaching home educating parents, it's also going to help teens, homeschool graduates, and anyone else who wants to understand better the new landscape in which we are sitting. And the purpose of this conversation here is that we want to encourage those of you who may be feeling very concerned about what all of this means and where we go to from here. Our hope is that you will at least be familiar with one of our faces or names or voices here, and that will resonate with you and therefore help you feel like you've got a friend alongside you. We know that times like this can feel very lonely and scary and darn confusing. But we're simply here to say that you are not alone, and hopefully you'll feel part of a big team that we are of home educating parents and families across Aotearoa. Yes, we may have varied reasons, methods and preferences around homeschooling, but fundamentally, we all want the same thing: a safe educational environment filled with just the right educational resources that fit our lifestyle, where our children can thrive. So, before we get into the nitty gritty of this conversation, let's more fully introduce ourselves, please. And so, starting with our oh so familiar and our enormously knowledgeable and greatly appreciated Cynthia Hancox. Welcome.
Thank you, Sheena. It's great to be here. So, as Sheena said, I'm the government liaison for the National Council of Home Educators alongside of Sheena. I am a veteran home educator. I home educated my own 5 now adult children for over 22 years, and some of my grandchildren are now being home educated. And I also work independently as a homeschooling consultant, helping families understand the application process and work through that. And in both of those spaces, I advocate for families individually, collectively, with the ministry, and just helping people understand policy, process, law, and talking to the ministry about those things as well.
Thank you. And let's get an introduction, please, from Issy.
Hello, folks. I'm Issy, aka Raving Dad, who you'll probably know me more as, and the host of the Life Without School podcast, which has been running for a couple of years now. But really, I'm a dad to 4 awesome kids. That is the main thing that I am. And we've been homeschooling now, home educating with their own kind of flavor that's down towards the unschooling end, which is, where this kind of legislation coming through is probably slightly more intimidating to hear from and compared to whether you're down the very structured end. So that's been our flavor. We've been home educating for about a decade now, so coming up to about 10 years. Our eldest has recently, I guess you would say, graduated. We had nothing kind of formal around it, but he's now moved on to tertiary study. He's doing a 3-year degree in computer generated imagery, and he's off kind of living his design and storytelling dreams. And then we've got 3 younger children kind of coming through as well. So we've been doing this a long time. We've also lived in Melbourne for a while. Actually, the very first year that we lived in Melbourne, we were part of the very first year that they did their reviews, where they picked 10% of families. So we moved across there, and then in the very first year we were reviewed. So we actually have been through a little bit of the different end of the spectrum of this as well, which is probably useful to hear about at some point. But that is me. Yep, dad to 4 awesome kids, and been doing this for a while now.
Great. Thanks so much, Issy. All right, Fran, tell us about yourself, please.
Hi. So I'm Fran McCall. I'm with Functional Education. I've been a Waldorf Steiner teacher now for well over 20 years, but I've been online in this space since 2018. Mum to a whole bunch of neurodivergent boys and all their gorgeous neurodivergent next generations. A lot of my grandbabies are on our program. We're just one of the resources on offer. We have so many resources on offer in our home community space, depending on which end of the spectrum that you like to be in. We're just one of those resources on offer at towards the more structured end to be there to support families who are coming into home education for the first time or traveling this path for a while and just need a little bit of support along the way and a little bit of structure to walk hand in hand, and we're just one of those people who walk beside them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fran. Krystel.
Thank you, Sheena. Hi, everybody. I am Krystel Watts from Engaging Minds. I am a mum to 8 children, and I have been homeschooling now for 15, 16. I think I'm in my 16th year now. I have 2 adult children flown and grown and graduated, so to speak. But like Izzy, there wasn't anything formal. He just finished home educating because he found a full-time job. So I have 6 still at home, aged from 16 down to 3. So I am doing high school, primary school, and preschool all in one. On the business side of things, my husband and I run Engaging Minds. So we are a home education curriculum supply store online. So I work with families throughout New Zealand and now Australia, and we support them to find the right curriculum to fit their family and their lifestyle. So whether that is one that we sell or one that I often pass people on to Fran, and just generally supporting home education in New Zealand and Australia and supporting families. I love being able to support families. So I'm here to support more families.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Sheena Harris, myself, I live in Waikato, Hamilton, and you will notice that I perhaps didn't grow up in these parts. I grew up in Scotland, but New Zealand's been my home for 19 years, and I have home educated our 3 boys for the past, like Krystel, nearly 16 years now. So it's been an incredible journey, which I have very much enjoyed and classed it as such a privilege to be able to homeschool with the freedom that we have done. My youngest is 16 now, so he's coming towards the top end. Older 2, one is a dairy farmer and one is working in graphic design following his degree So yeah, they're all doing amazing different things. And I began homeschool coaching some 7 years ago or so when I saw a need for families to be able to find help and resources and support and someone alongside to just talk some of the things through around homeschooling. And so I've been doing that now and yeah, for a number of years. So the main thing is we're all here to just be a representative for you, be a voice for you, and we'll just share some different ideas around what's been going on and how we think together as a nation of home educating families we can move forward. But let's just get going with the real thing for tonight, which is what on earth has just happened? What just kicked off this week that we've found ourselves suddenly sitting in this landscape that feels very unknown, very strange, very scary? Perhaps it would be best, I think, Cynthia, if you could just outline for us, please, how did we get here and what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So on a Monday evening, a fellow homeschooler with an eagle eye that was looking at law saw that the government had sneaked in an amendment to the Education and Training system reform bill that we had not heard about, we were given no warning of. And it basically talks about the ministry having the power to create regulations around assessment and reporting and anything else they should so choose now or in the future, which is the particularly concerning part, for home educators. And it's written in such a way that if we do not comply, they can revoke our exemptions. So obviously that's a very big deal. And so I immediately jumped on to looking into what was happening with that and to ask families to start writing to their MPs and expressing and to the minister and expressing their concern about that because because they brought that in at a time when the bill itself had already finished the select committee stage, it meant there was no opportunity for public consultation around it. So it was very underhanded, in my view, to sneak that in there with no warning and with no opportunity for consultation. So our quest, if you like, has been to either get that amendment removed or get it amended or get it sent for actual consultation by a select committee. So that's kind of what we're aiming to achieve. Now, that bill, even if it passes in its current form, nothing will happen straight away. The way it is written is that the ability to make regulations will start from July, but the ability to enforce regulation will not start until the 1st of July next year. So the ministry's view is that that allows them time to consult and figure out what this looks like and so on. But our view is that they should have consulted first, not after the fact when they've already got the power, extremely large power, to make regulation.
Yeah, thank you for outlining that for us. And I think that's that timeline looks pretty short. You know, you're saying they're not going to do anything until July this year. That's 6-7 weeks away. And to be implemented by 1st of July 27 next year. So that actually feels like a really short timeline for an awful lot from our perspective. An awful lot needs to happen for that to be put in place well.
Absolutely, yes, because they would need to start a consultation process with the home education sector. They'd need to, we as home educators would need to prepare what we want to present to the ministry around what are some reasonable alternatives. What could assessment look like in our space that would fit into the different styles of home education? Because we don't want them to just dictate this is the form of assessment you must use, right? We need to be able to say, well, here's some reasonable options, some reasonable alternatives. And the same for reporting. We don't want them dictating how we should report when it will not fit with a large portion of home educators. We should have options around them. So obviously we'd need to be well prepared. So this would be work to do on our end if we get to that stage. Obviously we're trying to not even need to get to that stage, but we need to be prepared for that. And then there'd be the engagement, the consultation, and then them actually making the regulations and then them telling us what they are. And then, you know, they've said, will there be developmental training they need to do for home educators to understand what they're wanting from us? There's a whole heap of things that would have to happen in that space. It's not that they just write something down on a piece of paper, tell us what it is, and expect us to do it instantly, because that would be impossible and unreasonable.
Yeah.
I think that that's a little disconnect that I'm feeling the most. I think it's that, and I'm speaking as a total layman here. I have no legal expertise. I failed first year law when I went and tried it. But the point that I kind of picked up was that the ministry is making this related to the visibility of home educating families. But the intent that's coming in behind it is to require kind of conformity to a more school shaped sort of a thing. So I think the assumption is, well, it'll be really easy because if we put some visibility on this, we can just get some assessments going and everyone will be able to show how they're doing. And that shows a real lack of understanding of the different flavors of home education.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a lot longer than they probably realize when they're saying, well, this will be really easy. If we get some visibility, we can just get some submissions coming in and they can all give us an update on how they're progressing against these sorts of, benchmarks, which is a terrible way to approach home education because then home education has to start to conform to look like that. And so it doesn't just make home education visible, it changes fundamentally home education.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of disconnect I've been feeling.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree with that entirely, Izzy.
Yes.
The problem we have, and even the ministry allude to it in their regulatory impact statement, is that staff at the ministry that process exemptions currently wouldn't have the capacity to be dealing with any of that stuff, and also don't have actually the knowledge of homeschooling curriculum, such as it is, what that looks like, to be suitable for that. So, as I said on a radio interview today, then who is the person that should read these reports or these assessments and determine, are they suitable? What do they show? Is there a concern, etc.? So there's so much on that side of things where they don't even have that knowledge or that capacity to be doing this in the way that they're implying that they would like to do, whatever that actually ends up looking like. And yes, from our side, it does have the feeling of fundamentally changing the homeschooling landscape. And for some families, that will feel awful, particularly if their model of home education is at the more unschooly or child-led end of the spectrum, for people who are perhaps very much in the school at home end of the spectrum, it might feel less of a stretch for still an imposition, still a time drag, still taking away from the teaching of our children. But for others at the other end of the spectrum, or towards that end of the spectrum, it's going to feel very foreign and extremely uncomfortable and even potentially traumatic, which, we don't want that for our families.
No.
Mm.
I was just thinking, I wonder if Fran or Krystel might want to sort of unpack, what were your first thoughts or what was your experience when you first read or heard about this?
Personally, it was how underhanded and sneaky. A little bit of shock factor, to be fair. I knew it was coming. I really did. We've tried to express that to the wider homeschool community that this is coming. So it wasn't a surprise, but it was the way it has been dealt with was the surprise. And just my immediate concern was the extreme scope of it and how we are expected to trust in the government, this current government and any future governments, that the regulations will be reasonable and will be consulted on. And there is no safeguards within the current law and these amendments that would actually happen. So that's my immediate concern with how it is worded.
Yeah.
I agree with Krystel that it wasn't a surprise. We'd been having conversations for some time. We'd been watching what was happening overseas. We were just seeing how it was going to drift down here, but it was a shock at the rapid rate it arrived and without any notification or consultation, which I found quite rude for a free democracy to bypass the key freedom democracy bit. I have been through a similar situation in the past when the alternative schools were pushed through a number of years ago into integrated schools. And I know how it felt to go through that process when we thought we were going to lose our entire identity. And we thought that all the beautiful gifts and the ways that we were bringing education was going to be ruined and we were going to be forced to comply in a very narrow way, but we were very, very fortunate. I can't say it's going to happen this time, but we were very fortunate at that time that the people that we were negotiating with at government level truly listened to us. And we were able to say, this is what it's important to us. This is how we can meet what you're needing, but do it in our way. So when it came through, my first shock once it settled down was, hang on a minute, here we go again. We've had success in this before. There's no reason why we can't have success at it again, so long as we are united, we are very clear, and we are organised, and we have our tools ready. And if that's the case, we actually can steer this ship where we need this ship to steer. But it means our community needs to unite and start steering together in order to, and be ready.
Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just add to that as well? Part of my reaction as well was my first reaction was Erica Stanford has decided that this is important and so it should be pushed through. And my first reaction was, oh, really? Okay, this is a hugely significant thing to say. I think this is important over here in this corner. I'm just going to push this through. But nothing in the documents that I've read so far have shown anything to say that home education is failing at any systemic level, shown no negative impacts whatsoever. All it's really saying is we'd like some more oversight, and at the end of it, we'd like to increase the quality of education for homeschooled children. But there's nothing actually to say this is the current quality and this is what we'd like to lift it to. So that actually probably gave me some encouragement to realize that this is probably feeling a little bit rushy. And there's probably a whole lot of holes in here that haven't really been thought through and considered very well at all. It felt, like I say, with no legal experience whatsoever, but reading through that document, it felt contradictory. It was weak. It felt quite, it was a really bizarre read for me. I went through it a bunch of times and thought, it's sort of talking over itself. It's not really making a compelling argument about anything other than we'd like to see more of what you're doing, please. And that probably gave me a little bit of encouragement that, literally the statistics in there, I've jotted them down so I didn't forget them. ERO completed 10 reviews in 2025. There's 10. What is that? A fraction of a percent of the home educating families in New Zealand. And the document itself says that those reviews are often triggered by parental conflict or wellbeing concerns. So you have a very, very tiny little sample that's heavily skewed towards this corner, and we are going to make a sweeping change that impacts the other 99.95% of families. So it all feels very thin to me. So my first reaction was, and then my second kind of considered reaction after reading back through it over and over was, there's a lot of holes in this.
Yeah,
entirely.
Definitely. And I think, so much presumptive language, so much, just background presumptive, no research, no inquiry at all whatsoever. And while we're all yelling from the sides, no, which has been, quite frustrating, I think, for a lot of us. But not only that document is full of inaccuracies as well. Cynthia, do you want to outline any of those in particular?
There is a lot. I could talk for ages about what's wrong. They've made assumptions about NCHENZ and our position and attitude. They've said there was 10 reviews last year. That's factually incorrect. They've made assumptions about, what that means, what the problems are, that there's well-being concerns. They've not consulted with the home education community, so they've consulted instead with themselves and with ERO. And the information that they've received is extremely biased and extremely skewed. And then, as Izzy's pointed out, they've tried to draw out from that to reach broad sweeping conclusions. They're trying to fix a problem without providing evidence that there is a problem. And they have means to actually investigate outcomes for home educators, to draw data from NZQA, to look at data that NCHENZ has collected, to ask for information. We could easily have engaged with them and provided them with information and ideas. And also the flip side of things, if home educators, and it's a big if, there's no evidence, if home educators or some home educators need to up their game, then the ministry could far more constructively engage with us by providing more equitable access to resources, professional development opportunities, information and support. By coming in from this way, they set themselves up even more so as effectively the enemy, for want of a better word, and will make home educators less inclined to engage. There could be an open collaborative relationship where people who actually do need some support and some help, if they can't find it within the home education sector, could reach out and say, look, my child has this particular thing going on. I could use some ideas. What can you offer? Or, you've just produced these new literacy and numeracy resources. Could we have access to those too? All these sorts of things to demand we meet an arbitrary standard, but limit our access to things and then demand more of our time taken away from our children to fulfill their regulations is completely inequitable and ridiculous, particularly when they can't prove there's a problem to start with.
And I noted the use of the term, the language quality was used in there, educational quality, without any clear definition of that. And so that's a huge hole. That is not it's not a neutral term. Whoever defines that eventual quality controls the thing. So it's very, it's crazy to have a document that makes statements like this without any definitions.
And to say they want to improve outcomes when they don't know what the outcomes currently are, they have got no way of ever quantifying, did what we have done improve outcomes? How are they going to benchmark that? They won't know, right? What amount of taxpayer money are they going to throw at this situation? They don't know. They can't even say that. It's just, it's a very strange approach and situation.
Yeah. It certainly is. I think it's a little bit surreal for all of us at the moment. I think we're probably all a bit shell-shocked. And, those of us here and others who are working so hard in this space to say, okay, what are we going to do here? What's next step? So perhaps we could just talk about that a little bit. Now, of course, it went out pretty quickly straight away. Write to your MPs, try and do this. And so let's just speak to that a little bit. What have we done? What have any of us here done so far to try and, blow the trumpet? What's been happening?
So obviously I've encouraged everyone to write to their MPs, and I just really want to thank people who've done that, because I am getting feedback from the other side that it is having an effect. MPs in an election year are very concerned that a large number of their constituents are unhappy with something that their party is doing. So that's particularly the national, but also the coalition MPs. So that's being effective, and we need to keep that pressure up. We can't let that go. I've also been talking to certain politicians. Myself, I've been gathering information and making information available. The next step from that particular perspective is that we want to aim to get the bill, the amendment in particular, either dismissed or sent back to the select committee so it could actually be consulted on, because one of our chief things here is there was no consultation. So there is a method within Parliament that when a bill comes up for its third reading, it gets introduced by the Clerk of the House, and then the minister responsible, so in this case Erica Stanford, normally speaks to it. In between those two things happening, there's the opportunity for any member of Parliament to put forward a motion to dismiss the bill in its entirety, or to dismiss certain parts of it, or to send it effectively back to the Select Committee. So that is what we want to work on next. And when that motion is put forward, there's no debate. It is then voted on. So I will be putting out information, because this time around, the last time writing to MPs, we encouraged people to put their own personal words in there, and that was really important. But this time we probably want to have more of a precise format so that we hit the key points without having really lengthy communications that they may be getting a bit jaded about, to ask MPs to support a motion to send this amendment to the Select Committee so that we can actually have an opportunity for consultation. So that's a very positive possibility. Obviously, we'd love to just have the thing completely dismissed, but even sending it back to the Select Committee, if we then have the opportunity to consult and put in feedback, the Select Committee will then give advice to the ministers. And so there's still an opportunity for it to be dismissed, or to be dramatically altered, or safeguards put in place, or some other amendment made to it before it becomes law. So that's kind of the next stage that we will work on. Now, beyond that, if it does become enacted in this format or in another format, we obviously need to be well prepared, as Fran said, to unite, to have our tools ready, to then engage with the ministry around consultation about what will these regulations actually look like, what options can we put forward as to what is reasonable ways of assessing or reporting that fit in with the wide variety of home educators, and really work on things from that end so we can come down to something that is reasonable if we do not get it dismissed in the first instance. I've
Thank
also
you.
been doing media interviews, lots of media interviews. I've got 3 more
Lots.
tomorrow. So,
Thank you so much for that. We
Mm.
really appreciate you stepping into that
Mm.
space and being such a great advocate, and the knowledge and experience that you're able to speak to that in particular. So the letter writing to MPs is having an impact. I hear that their inboxes are chocker, and like you're saying, they're all getting quite concerned. So well done, people. Keep it up. It's really useful. And I think I've been encouraging people as well as writing to my MP and whatnot as well. I've been encouraging people, hey, get your children to write. Get your children to write a letter, to write a poem about why they love homeschooling and what they love about, the freedoms that they get to have their pattern of their day however fits them best, or whatever it is, or draw a picture or something. And if you've got teens, here's their opportunity to write a persuasive piece of writing to write to their MP or someone else in the community that might sit up and listen to voices as well. So I've just been encouraging, get your other family members on board as well, grandparents. There may be grandparents listening here. There's home educating grandparents out there who are very supportive. Thank you for those supportive grandparents on the fringes and helping families along. You can write as well and bring your perspective into, why it's made a difference for your grandchildren to be in this context. So there's all sorts of different ways I think that we can step up and do something. And if we all do something, even if it feels little, even if it feels a little bit hopeless at times, it's not hopeless at all. Movement is happening and there's more to come. So let's keep pushing.
Exactly. There's also opportunities for those who can to go and meet with their local MPs,
Yes.
particularly those who are in Erica Stanford's constituency. They can call her office and say, I am a local person. I would like to meet with my local MP. And then, it's an opportunity to put real homeschooling faces in front of her and to politely express their concerns, but to let her see, we are normal people with, articulate children and what have you. So do take those opportunities where possible, speak to local MPs. I would encourage people to go to public events where MPs are speaking. In the next week, Erica Stanford is noticeably got no public events, but you may find that other ones do. But yes, whatever opportunities you have to interact, whether it's to send emails, whether to make phone calls, to go and visit with MPs and Erica Stanford, it would be valuable.
Well, they're getting the visibility they wanted, aren't they? So the interesting thing, I think, is that we need to make it really clear that homeschoolers are not afraid of oversight because we have something to hide.
Correct.
We 100% support child well-being, educational quality, all of the things that the stuff is talking about. But any accountability just needs to understand what it's going to hold to account. Just needs to very clearly understand that. And so, I think getting out and writing and speaking to these politicians and actually showing up in person would be incredibly powerful, so they can see these are just real families doing something different, and they're here to talk about it. So yeah, sharing the stories is really powerful. But I think the irony is that they're getting a whole lot of visibility all of a sudden, just not the kind that they were looking for.
Thank you, Izzy. I feel the same way.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, we aren't afraid of accountability. And we have no reason to be. There is mechanism within the law already for them to do error reviews. Just because previous national governments chose to not fund routine reviews, that's their problem. They can change that. As part of the changes, they are wanting to increase reviews to 200 a year, but that would be focused on people where they see concern through this reporting and so on that they're talking about, assessment that they're talking about at the moment. It's still very skewed to the negative. And whenever, routine reviews, while everyone goes, oh, we don't want error reviews, totally get that you don't. But the benefit that we had in the past when routine ERO reviews happened is that ERO got to know homeschoolers. They got to see the benefits. They got to see the positive side. And the chief reviewers who used to do homeschoolers back in those days, they became our biggest advocates. The problem we have now is they only see people in problem situations. And so there's a negative perception, and most reviewers hardly do any homeschoolers. They only see the odd one. And so they don't build up any kind of picture. And they come in with an innate bias, even though they say they don't, but they do. And it's not to our benefit in that scenario. So more reviews, but not on there's a concern basis, would actually be more beneficial to the community. The point remains, though, they have that option and they've just not been exercising it. And again, that is their problem. That shouldn't be made into our problem, where we now have to do their job for them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia, but wasn't that a funding issue? So they found, my memory is that they found that homeschoolers were outperforming their school counterparts. So they decided to put that money towards actually helping schools that were struggling rather than the homeschoolers that weren't.
Well, that's probably factually correct, but not how they would have framed it. So how they framed it was they were doing something like 600 reviews a year. Each of those reviews, from memory, cost something like $400 to $600 per student. To review a school costs $1,200, an entire school of maybe 1,000 or more students. 95% of home education reviews came out that they were being taught as regular and well as. So for only 5% or up to 35 students a year not meeting the bar, they were pouring all of this money in to regularly reviewing homeschoolers that were meeting the bar. And doing that does take away capacity to focus on the schools. And ERO's fairly small department. It's somewhat under-resourced. So it was actually a fiscal year in which the government was looking to tighten its belt across the board. So it was looking at all of its programs, not just in education, but all of its programs, and going, what is not providing value for money? Oh, look, reviewing all those homeschoolers is achieving nothing. They're doing a great job. Why would we continue to pour money into that? So they just stopped, and they said, we'll provide funding for up to 35 a year because that's the most that ever failed, and we'll do it on a complaints basis. And so that's what they did, and it's remained that way since 2009. That wasn't the first time they stopped routine reviews, but it was the most recent time they stopped routine reviews.
I come back to where you said, what else are people doing? And I 100% agree with everything that everybody's saying. I am also doing the same. I've been writing endless letters to Parliament and putting things out to my community. And please keep on doing that. That is important. But I think it's also really important as a community during times of stress to look after each other in the community.
Yes.
I know in my functional ed bit of the community, almost 70% of our new intake are trauma-based in some way, shape or form. They've chosen homeschooling, not because they wanted to be active homeschoolers, but because of situations in a schooling system or out elsewhere that have forced them into this community. They're already fragile. They're already shaky. They're doing the very, very best that they can, and they're adjusting really, really well. And if you know people in your community who are like this, they need support at the moment, particularly from the veterans, from those who have been doing it a while, who are quite calm through this. They've seen change happen. Embrace those young ones who are coming in. They're new, they're scared, they're in trauma situations. Do lots and lots of positive. You do amazing things as a homeschool community with your kids every single day. I'm not talking TikTok worthy stuff. I'm talking real. You know, the real homeschooling. You're baking in your kitchen is a mess. Your kids are doing incredible pieces of art. They're singing. They're working together. They're gardening. They're doing these amazing things. You forget that this is incredible learning. Make it visible. Put it on your social feeds. Put it in your homeschool groups. Remind everybody what homeschooling looks like, so that the new ones who are coming in and through, and they're really shaky at the moment because this is a scary time for them. They've already been through big change. They just need to look at it and go, look what they're doing. I can do that too. And I don't need to be scared. I'm part of a bigger picture, and it's an amazing community and organisation, and we do great work with our kids across the board. We make a big difference in the future generations coming through. And I think sometimes we forget to pat each other on the back of all the amazing stuff. So don't just write to Parliament, do that too. But don't just write to Parliament.
Yeah.
Celebrate each other, celebrate what you're doing, embrace someone local near you, and give a helping hand where you can.
Very well said, Fran.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
brilliant.
Mm.
100%.
I'd just like to back Fran up that we've found that in our world of homeschooling. So many families are being forced into homeschooling. They feel that they're forced into homeschooling because schooling is not an option for them, because school is not working for them. And that is a different kettle of fish from families that choose to homeschool. And these families need a different form of support. And they're terrified that they're going to have to send their kids back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love that, framing that, let's be the supportive community that we are, especially at this time. And that's a really helpful conversation, definitely. Thank you so much. I just want to dial back to something that was mentioned earlier. I think it was Fran, you mentioned about tools. And as we were talking about that thing around, accountability, and look, we are open, happy, willing, ready to have some kind of check, accountability, whatever that looks like. We know that has sat there anyway as a ERO review. And, we've all been expected to have some kind of record keeping or other. And I know we've done a lot of talking and encouragement about that over the last years as well for our community. But I just wonder, what might some of the tools look like for us? Because it's going to be varied, of course. And I think this is going to take some time to discuss if the ministry will listen to us. I'm hoping they will. So what kind of ideas or tools or do you see perhaps that we could bring in, implement? And even if it's not necessarily to go externally, what can we be doing in our homes now that can help us find progress, evidence, whatever, for our families?
Show you something that looks like a tool. It actually looks like a rainbow bridge. As ridiculous as that is, this, believe it or not, is a big, scary tool. This is Brown's 14 morphemes. It takes you from the single hollow phrase word, when you're learning how to write for the very first time, you write your very first word on the page, all the way up to an essay. And it's each little step that you follow that eventually lands here. But as a tool, anyone can use this. And it doesn't matter what end of the scale, if you are freedom schooling or if you are structured learning, doesn't matter where you are on the scale. Your kids dance up and down across this bridge. Usually if they're neurodiverse, they're chasing butterflies and they're sideways and it can take any long time, as long as it takes them. But as a parent who's homeschooling, you know what the steps are on the bridge. And you eventually will get your child from the start of the bridge across the bridge. You'll do it in any way, shape, or form that meets your child. You'll do it as long as it takes for them to get there. You'll go up and down as many times as it needs, and eventually they will cross that bridge and they will learn that particular skill. It's a tool because the bridge outlines the things that are naturally covered when they learn it. People are happy at the end because parents know that their child made it there. Any regulatory authority is happy that they made it there. It's easily, you don't have to report on it because you can just easily very much say, oh yes, we're up to the yellow. And our next step will be the green. And you can have any plan that suits your family to get there in any time frame. But actually, you're all heading in the same direction. It's not that scary. It doesn't have to be a multi-choice test sat in 45 minutes with some sort of big, serious exam situation. Tools can be as simple as that. You're all heading in the same direction with the same outcome. How you get there, though, can be really varied. It doesn't have to be a big deal if you don't want it to be. That, by the way, is a language comprehension tool. It's real. It's backed up all the educators and the professors and the structured literacy people.
Yeah.
Actual tool, and it's not even scary.
And I think that's really helpful. That's just a wonderful example to get us going, Fran, to hear that whole, if there's some kind of assessment could come, it doesn't have to be scary. We're not going to get scared. We're not going to be afraid, but we are just going to speak up, and we are just going to be on the lookout for some great tools, great resources, great possibilities of what it could look like, you know, in our family. And when the opportunity comes, and it will come, for us to sort of, you know, as a community, be chipping in ideas and possibilities that hopefully NCHENZ will be able to take to have some proper consultations, and that you know, we can take a collective, you know, toolbox of lots of tools and ideas of what assessment can look like, what reporting can look like. Yeah, because we live it, we get it, we're experienced, right? Mm.
Yeah,
I
the way
think this,
we've always thought about this, sorry, Cynthia,
so,
will be, you know, from being in the startup world for so long and in senior leadership positions in these software companies, you're always answerable to, you know, your board of directors, your shareholders, the executive team. So there was no hiding. You had to have accountability, but also it wasn't a culture where, but we're going to go really slow and we'll just take it. It was, let's move fast, let's be fluid. And so I took a lot of what I learned in that space in terms of accountability into our home ed environment, which is a lot around goal setting, individual goal setting, and
beautiful.
reflection points along the way that are being recorded in really light ways. But it's all very individual. But but by the time you kind of go through a little bit of a process of that, and you're setting goals and you're doing that relatively regularly, you're revising them. It's cool if they change. That's great. It means you're evolving as a person, and then you're reflecting them on those things, and you're learning from those things. The story that creates is amazing. And it's rich, it's deep, it's interesting, it's personal, it's individualized, and it's the ultimate accountability. I am being accountable to myself and the people around me who I'm setting these goals with. So I've found that a really, really useful framework as a tool, not a specific kind of, you know, here's a book to write things down, but just as a framework that this is how these kind of fast moving companies operate. They are highly accountable. There is nowhere to hide. You don't have to have really strict, stringent, by the book sort of things. In fact, that slows you down. And so I always kind of brought that back in.
Excellent.
Brilliant.
I had a couple of suggestions or ideas I want to put out there. What Izzy was saying about reflection points. Reflecting is something that always used to fly well with Aero. So something I used to do is sit down, ideally every 6 to 12 months, but in all honesty, it was less frequently. Sit down and reflect on each of my children and go, how are they doing? What have I noticed in the last few months? What have they achieved? What new thing have they learnt? And just write a few sentences generally related to some of the core learning areas, but just kind of covering some different things. So there's something about literacy. And I might have said something like, Chris is doing really well with writing his short stories now, but he's struggling a little bit with his times tables, or, you know, something. So it's a bit of pro and con. And then the things where I was identifying that something was a bit weak or a bit of a struggle, what do I want to do about it? This term, I'd like to introduce this new resource or this new idea or this new method. And I just wrote like a page and a half about each of my children. And I did that for myself. But when I happened to have Aero reviews and I showed this to them, they loved it. They were like, well, this is you looking at the situation, identifying points of progress, identifying points of concern, and making a plan to move forward. And those were the things that, you know, gave me the flying colours on the Aero reviews in those days. And there's many different ways of doing that. I think the other thing is that life is often very busy. And so we need a way to simply make sure we're keeping some stuff that we can then use as samples or reference points or to look back on when we're writing our reflections. And so one idea is to simply have a folder or a box for each child, and you routinely drop into that some samples. So that might be a photocopy of a letter they wrote to grandma. It might be a copy of a story that they did, a photo or a copy of a piece of artwork that they did. A page out of a math workbook that was particularly good. Something, just drop some samples in there. And at the end of every either month or term, go back over them with your children together and reflect on, hey, look, remember this really cool thing you did? Remember that great piece of art? Remember whatever? And talk about them together. And then together with the child, choose the best representative pieces and put them into a more permanent portfolio, a clear file or whatever. This becomes a keepsake for them later on too, but it also becomes evidence that you could show to anybody, Aero, the ministry, or whomever, and it also gives you something to remember. This is what we did. this is what we achieved, this is what happened. And then you can write short summaries, or if we end up having to do reports or something, you've got something to draw on. And it can be very low pressure. Another idea is to have a diary. And in that diary, you just make notes each day, end of each day, something that happened. We finished reading that book together. We went to ice skating. Johnny finally learnt how to write his B's around the right way. Annie mastered the 3 times table. Whatever it is, just making notes, because again, it's something you can show. It shows that you are paying attention to your children. It's not profound. It's not, formal assessment, but it is a form of assessment, right? Because you are looking, you are observing, and you are paying attention and making note. And so all of those things can be really helpful.
Which goes back to what you were saying as well, right, Fran, in terms of celebrating what we're doing, because so much is happening in this lifestyle, but it's very easy to not see it because life is busy and we're moving forward and we're going on. And then 6 months later, we say, I don't feel like we've done anything. But when you reflect, if you are actually relatively diligent with a bit of a reflection, even if it is, like you say, Cynthia, it might be 6 months, might be 8 months, but if you sat down and really thought back and really pulled out some bits and pieces, it is phenomenal how much actually happens in that day-to-day life when you accumulate it over a period of time. I can speak to the feeling of not doing this consistently. When we were first reviewed in Melbourne, it was 10 years ago now. So right at the very start, we were very, very loose. We didn't store anything. We weren't really reflecting anything. And we had this email saying, we would like all of these materials, please. And we'd like them very soon. And my wife, Kate, and I looked at each other with panic in our eyes and said, oh no, what do we do? But we sat down and we started pulling things together. And you realize very quickly that actually, and to be clear, we were not structured homeschoolers. We were far more down towards the unschooling end. But the amount of stuff that you can pull together when you get really intentional about it is pretty amazing. So if you mentioned this, Cynthia, I think that regardless of what happens going forward, it is prudent to just start doing some stuff around this. Right. Really low key, low effort, but just make it consistent. That's what I've found is the real key. It's just to do a little bit often. It doesn't have to be big. It could be literally 10 minutes a week. We can all find 10 minutes a week. That's totally doable. And you're just jotting down some stuff or grabbing some bits or grabbing some photos from your phone and chucking it into a folder and then moving on, so that if something ever does happen and you have to go through a review or you have to provide something, the amount of stuff you have to draw on will be amazing. And you can just build a bit of a narrative around it.
I just want to speak to the sort of other end of it that Issy also touched on, and it's the goal setting with the children. So that's something we used to do periodically. We used a more structured approach for some of our children. We used very unschooly for some of them. We were quite a mixed bag because my children are very unique and individual creatures. But with the ones that were a little more structured, and you can do this, but in a slightly different form with an unstructured approach too, is I'd sit down at the beginning of the term with my kids, one at a time, and say, what do you want to achieve this term? And if we were working at high school level in particular towards a particular goal, we'd be like, okay, if the long-term goal is in 3 years, you've done this, what do we need to do this year? What do we need to do this term? And we would break it down together. And then they would identify what other things that they want to do. I want to learn to play the flute. I want to, do a quilt. I want to do whatever. And we'd set goals together so that they were then written down. And in some cases, again, depending on the child and their needs, we might put a chart on the wall so they could see how they were progressing. We might, we have something in the front of their personal book, whatever we did, so that they knew what the touch points were. And we were always fluid with this. So if something happened during the term that threw our plan off a little bit, we just adjusted, right? But if you don't have an idea where you're going at the beginning, it tends to be, much more, you achieve less than if you've got a goal that you know what you're trying to work towards, even if you end up changing your goals as you go. But by doing that, it provides another touch point for your record keeping of, we sat down, we set these goals. And at the end of the term, how many of those did we achieve? What ones are we still working towards? You don't have to always achieve everything that you set out to achieve in a given time frame, right? It's about planning and about having intentionality. And then you can look at it and go, well, that goal turned out to be not particularly helpful, so we throw it away. That's okay, right? However, we're working on this, but we're not there yet. So that's one we're carrying over because we're still finishing making that quilt, or we're still learning to cook chocolate muffins or swim breaststroke or whatever it is that we're working on. And so, yes, from the forward and from the reflection point of view are both really valuable in that space.
And failed goals are amazing data points in a child's life, right? I set a goal to go and do this thing. Actually, I've kind of started exploring it, and that thing sucks, or I really don't like it, or it's not what I thought it was, or whatever it is. That's wonderful. That is
Absolutely.
learning coming to life, right? And so we should be setting those goals and exploring them, and not saying, well, we set the goal, okay, well, now you got to spend the next 8 months doing it. That is very school type thinking. We throw that out and you revise and you revise.
Just to throw an anecdote in here, my son one day decided that taxidermy looked really cool, and he was going to become a taxidermist when he grew up. So he set a goal to learn to do taxidermy. He watched every YouTube video, because he's a very visual and hands-on learner, on how to do taxidermy. He managed to shoot a blackbird and he stuffed it. And he decided that was a really fun, cool project, but he no longer wanted to be a taxidermist. And that was totally fine, right?
And now you know. Awesome.
Right.
Similar story with my son, who was about 15. And he said, I think I want to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a lawyer. He said, okay, well, let's start exploring that. So we got books out on ethics and case law and legal history and that kind of thing. And he sort of started exploring it. It was about 3 months he probably was going down this path. And then eventually just sat there at dinner one night and said, man, I hate law. It is just like the worst. I could never imagine being a lawyer. It's just horrible. And I was like, that's great, because I went to university to study law and I found it out that way with a student, loan behind me, and I accrued debt and all that kind of thing. And way better to find it out when you're 15, 16 years old by actually exploring the thing.
Imagine how much incidental learning he experienced in that process.
Totally.
Yeah.
But that's not the point of homeschooling. This is the freedom that we have. I remember when we were studying Egypt for something, and Auckland Museum had that big Egyptian thing on, and we took this big road trip up for the weekend, and we were in the museum for the day. We came in, we were cooking Egyptian feasts, we were watching Egyptian movies, we were making clay sarcophaguses, and we were wrapping clay models in toilet paper to make them into dummies, and my whole house exploded into Egypt for like ages. This is fun. This is education. This is the freedom that we have. Our projects don't have to be boring, stuck at a desk and fit a box. And we've got this ability to explore. So as homeschoolers, make the most of it. Explore it. Do it in all these different ways. And then share it with others. Share your excitement, share your joy, share your successes, so that others can see, wow, that's an incredible piece of learning. Maybe I'll do something similar. Inspire others around you while you're having such a great time, because we get the best part of educating with our kids alongside them as part of the journey. How cool is that?
We can do some amazing things. And I think, I love what Fran was saying too. And it is absolutely the joys of homeschooling. And I love the idea of sharing things with others to encourage them. But I think that as a veteran homeschooler, there's a flip side to that. And is that people can become very intimidated when they see other people doing all these really cool things, and they might feel like they're not. So there's a balance in that. I do think we should share, but we should also know as homeschoolers, we don't have to emulate each other. Just because Jane down the road is super good at organising science experiments down to the nth degree and presenting these amazing projects, it doesn't mean we need to do it that way. That doesn't mean we're failing if we do not, right? So it's about finding your own groove. Some of us may want to have some structured core curriculum that we know we're progressing on, some basics in a certain way, and that is fabulous and that is fine. And for others, they do it in a different way, more hands-on, more project-based, more whatever. And all of those are perfectly valid. And even when it comes to presenting this to the Ministry or the Aero in some form down the track, we don't have to all look the same. And that is, something we would push back on so hard if they tried to make us all look the same to fit the same box, because that is never going to work with homeschoolers. We are also individual, and it's the ministry that need to learn that, not us that need to adapt to their boxes, if that's the right word. So, be encouraged to be yourselves in the homeschooling journey and to find what works for your children. We do encourage you to be diligent in thinking about what your children need and thinking about what learning experiences will benefit them, what resources you can wrap around them. those things are important. Our children are entitled to an education in a suitable form, whatever that looks like. But it's not a one size fits all. And we don't have to be TikTok worthy, to borrow, I think it's Fran's phrase.
No.
Ordinary and plain is fine. There are those days where you lay on the couch and read stories all day long. And they're highly valuable. And there's the days where you do all these amazing things and fill out pages in your workbooks and make amazing projects. And, you know, it's life. It's real life, which is not all the same and not, you know, it varies enormously as to our energy and our children's energy and focus and interest and dynamics. And we have to flow with that. And that's okay.
I think that's possibly why the homeschool community has pushed back on this en masse, though, is because we are so varied. It's grossly varied. The variation is just absolutely huge. And if the ministry were to put regulations and assessments on us, how would that look like? What would that work? School assessments will not work for homeschoolers, the majority of homeschoolers. And even I can say myself selling curriculum, you can do an assessment on one kid on one curriculum, and because they're using a different curriculum, they would fail that said assessment. It doesn't mean they aren't intelligent. It doesn't mean they're not up to standard. It doesn't mean they're not learning. It just means they haven't learned the particular thing in that assessment. And that therein lies the problem with this whole amendment and what the Ministry of Education wants to put in with zero consultation, is that a one-size-fit-all assessment will not work at all.
I agree. And there's another angle to it too. I've been talking to someone who's both a homeschooler and in the education sector, and they were talking about how all the new assessments brought in for the schools where they all have to do the same thing. The ministry's had to invest an enormous amount of time and money into professional development for the teachers to understand what the assessments are and to deliver them, and an enormous amount of money into the cost of providing these assessments. And it seems highly doubtful they would want to invest that into the home education sector. So I think to some degree, we can be assured that they're unlikely to impose the exact same things because they won't want to spend the money. So I'm hopeful that there will be sense and flexibility around what it would look like, because I completely agree that standardised testing would not be an effective model for home educators. Some students literally can't engage with it. They're taken out of school because they're traumatised by, amongst other things, trying to fit into that kind of system, and it just won't work and it won't reflect on them. And I mean, I have so many questions about what they're intending. We don't know. That's the thing. We do not know.
Yep.
And if they require assessment and if they require record keeping, there's obviously the thing of if we don't comply, they could potentially revoke the exemption. But is it compliance as in we did it, or is it you must achieve a certain standard? We don't know, right? So there's all these things that have yet to be worked through, and I don't think we should freak out about yet because we're not there yet. There's that discussion, that consultation has to happen. They can't just impose some standardised, you must all do PAT tests, or, you must all do this or do that. It won't work because there's a cost involved in that. There's professional learning development involved in it. It's all stuff to be worked through if we get to that stage, but we are hopeful that we will not get to that stage in the form that it's currently being presented. But again, I agree that we all need to be doing something and expect some form of increased oversight, interest, accountability, whatever the word is, going forward. We can't be naive about that.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up. We could talk about this all day, I know. And I wasn't quite sure where this conversation would sort of morph towards, but I think it was really interesting that we got to that point where we passionately were sharing our ideas, our suggestions, our observations, our ways, our methods, or whatever that was just sewing into, because we all have so much of that to give. And not just us here in the room now. There are so many out there, those of you listening as well, who could just have equally have added in your tuppence worth, your ideas, your methods, your ways, your encouragements, your enthusiasm. All of that is what this is all about. And because we are passionate home educating parents, We know that this makes a difference in our children's lives for all sorts of different reasons, and we want to keep going. We want to just stand up for justice in New Zealand, and that's what we're shouting about. Really, let's have proper dialogue with the government and with Ministry of Education, ERO, all of those parties. I hope this has been helpful for those of you who've tuned in to listen or watch. And Cynthia put in her latest blog post that there is a bump in the road. And I agree with that. It feels really uncomfortable, this bump right now, but it's not the end of the road. This is by no means the end of the road, and we can journey this together. As we touched earlier, let's encourage one another, particularly those who are finding it especially difficult at this time and in this season, the newbies, the ones who have come from all sorts of different traumatic experiences. So let's support one another. Let's keep, blowing the trumpet, waving the flag, doing what we can, and showing a united front, really, as the very best we can to move forward into a positive space. Thank you all so very much indeed for being here with us. And I would like you all to, just because if anybody wants to get a hold of those of us that have been here sharing, then you can do so. So, Cynthia, can you tell us, please, how people can get a hold of you if they need to?
Sure. So my website, cynthiahancox.com, has a contact page on it, and also articles in the information index section about some of this. My social media, I've got my Cynthia Hancox page, but also or my profile, but I've also got the Cynthia Hancox New Zealand Home Education Advisor page, and that's where I'm posting updates on this situation and on next steps and what have you. I'll be posting there, and it will likely also be on the NCHENZ page for those who are members, about how to write next to MPs in order to get this sent to Select Committee for consultation. So please do check those out.
Thank you so much. Izzy, how can people get a hold of you?
My website is startravingdadblog.com, and you can find me as Start Raving Dad on Facebook and start.raving.dad on Instagram. But also just feel free to send me an email, izzy@startravingdadblog.com. I am not in the weeds on the legal stuff, but I can absolutely give encouragement. So please don't hesitate if you're ever sitting there at night thinking, I just want someone else's opinion on this, or I just want to feel like I'm heard, please do email. Honestly, I'm absolutely reading all my emails and trying to get back to as many as I can.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Fran?
Just the functionaleducation.com website and all the social medias that go with it. And if you want to get hold of me directly, admin@functionaleducation.com, and it comes straight through to my laptop, and I'm there if you need a hand.
Wonderful. Thank you. Krystel?
Thank you, Sheena. We are engagingminds.co.nz, and the same on socials, Engaging Minds NZ on Facebook, mainly Facebook, but I am on Instagram as well. Please reach out to me as well. I'm more than happy to offer the support. We specialise in curriculum, but anything home education, I'm happy to support on. So we are info@engagingminds.co.nz.
Fantastic. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, then you can find my website, homeschoolcoaching.nz, and there's a contact page there as well to get through to an email with me. I also have a podcast, so it's a little one that's just getting going over the past year, The Practice of Homeschooling. So if you want to check out what's going on there as well, you'd be very welcome. And of course, if any of you listening are not members of NCHENZ, we really encourage you to do so. If you are applying for your exemption, or if you already have your exemption, then you are really welcome to sign up. It's free. It's NCHENZ, NCHENZ.org.nz. So we hope this has been helpful for you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation, and we'll see where it goes. So we'll say goodbye for now, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.